Welcome to The Author Show, where we feature new authors and books, from fiction to self-help and everything in between. You'll find it all at theauthorshow.com. That's theauthorshow.com. And now let the show begin.
Hello and welcome back to the show. This is your host, Don McCauley. Today we're welcoming to the program author Ricardo Jose Gonzales-Rothi, and he is the author of the Mango Chronicle. Before I bring in today's guest, a quick reminder that selected interviews are available at our website, as well as on major platforms like Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, and many more. Ricardo, how are you?
I'm doing great, Don. Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, I'm kind of an odd duck. I was in academic medicine as a physician and researcher and administrator for almost 4 decades, and then I wanted to fulfill my passion, which has always been to write non-scientific stuff. And I decided to retire from medicine. And over the past several years, I've been working on my creative writing. And it's just been a very liberating thing that I've always wanted to do.
So tell us about your book.
The Mango Chronicle is a bittersweet coming-of-age story about a kid whose Cuban Huck Finn childhood gets upended by a nuclear crisis, and he lands in a place where he feels unwelcome and becomes a good American by living within two souls, and later seeks his roots by remembering the branches of the very mango tree that framed his childhood. That's pretty much in a nutshell.
So who did you write your book for specifically? Who's your target audience here?
I would say my target audience was really families, primarily Latinos and Cuban American families. The Cuban family and the Latino family is very close-knit. So grandparents, parents of kids, people who are immigrant families, this resounds to them. I also wrote it for educators. My book, because it's set in a historical context, it provides a slice of history and a coming-of-age story from the perspective of a kid. Okay, so it's not politically biased in that sense. The types of people that would read this book would be probably people in their 20s all the way up to 75 plus, as long as their cataracts don't interfere. But men and women, I think, would find it equally refreshing and instructional as well.
So could you say there's any type of central message or perhaps underlying theme that you would say runs throughout your book?
There are several, but really the recurring theme is the duality of living and existing in two lives within the same culture. As an exile, one has to become a bit of a chameleon in order to thrive, really without forgetting who you are inside. And most exiles know this. Let me just give you an impression. I go to the bank and I say, I'd like to open up a savings account, and the person asks me where I'm from, and I tell them, and they say, funny, you don't look Cuban. Okay, so take that scenario. Take scenario B. I go to the same teller and I say, hello, my name is Ricardo and I would like to start a new banking account. Totally different impressions. So as an immigrant in this country, being in a new culture with a different language, I've had to become a chameleon of sorts in order to make it through.
So if you had to choose, what would you say is the single most important idea you're sharing in your book that's really going to add value to the reader's life?
I think it's remembering to forget on the one hand, and at the same time remembering to forgive on the other. I think this is really the key to maturing and leading a successful, regret-free life. One chapter I devoted to this whole selective blindness, which is to remember to forget some things that you know are happening but distract you, so you want to stay focused and moving forward. I wrote another chapter which really is very important in my mind, is remembering to forgive. How do you understand others' perspectives? That you learn that when understanding people's motives, intentional or otherwise, forgiveness is kind of a way of letting go. And I think it's very liberating. And I think readers will find that this whole idea of remembering to forgive is very liberating.
Now, if you were asked to compare your book with any book out there we might already be familiar with, which book would it be and why?
Well, I can think of a book that was written by Carlos Ede. It's pronounced Ada, but people say Ire. He wrote it back in 2003. It's a long-standing bestseller. It's called When It Snows in Havana. And it's a memoir about a boy who left home in Havana. Carlos Ire is a philosopher historian, and he details his childhood recollections from having to leave Cuba from what was a privileged pre-Castro life. I mean, he lived in very restrictive country clubs, swimming pools, luxury homes. In contrast, my book is very similar in the setting and in the time, but my father was a grocer. My mother was a teacher. I grew up in a barrio, and we had no social or political standing. Both books deal with the same era in history. Both memoirs address a series of anecdotes and stories about childhood of two boys in a foreign land, and they're both told from the perspective of a child who's precocious and observant. But my book focuses more on the coming of age and less on the political and religious climate of the times.
So in your opinion, what's the biggest misconception about the topic of exile and immigration?
Immigration is, I guess I would say, it's coming permanently to live in a foreign country. You apply, you get there, and you get processed. Exile is leaving or being barred from one's native country for political, maybe punitive, or asylum reasons. And I think it's important to understand that while all exiles are immigrants, not all immigrants are exiles. And it isn't just about the semantics. And take, for example, Desi Arnaz, remember Ricardo, Melania Trump, Fareed Zakaria, Elon Musk. They're all immigrants. But then you take Gloria Estefan, Madeleine Albright, Dith Pran, the Cambodian photojournalist, Miguel Hernandez. These were all exiles. So there is a difference, and the perspective is very different from both ends.
So how did you come up with the title?
That's an interesting one. The mango part of it comes from a tree of my childhood in a farm with a friend where I played. I love mangoes. And in the process of writing it, it became the mango, and the mango tree became a metaphor for roots of something which lasts. Contrast that with the displacement that I suffered in exile, the nostalgia for my home and the tropics, and mostly for family. The tree can live up to 300 years. And mangoes are beautiful trees. They got shiny leaves, they're fruitful, and they're delicious. The Chronicle part is kind of it's written as a quasi-chronologic order of anecdotes and stories. And the first half of the book is really written from the vantage of a very precocious young kid, a kind of Cuban Huck Finn of sorts, as I mentioned earlier. And later on, it's given the perspective of a savvy adult who is reflecting and trying to make sense of his childhood, his roots, and his identity. So I called it the Mango Chronicle.
So was there any part of this book that was difficult for you to write?
Yeah, I think that there were certain intimate aspects of my family, especially dealing with my mother, that made it very difficult for me. My mother, you have to realize Cuba, her life was living in a male-dominated society, and she struggled with being wife, mother, and professional, as well as an unfulfilled writer and poet. And add to that some of the humiliating times that we had when we first came to New Jersey, and she ended up cleaning bedpans in the hospital because it was the only job she could get. And then later on in her life, her eventual memory loss and physical decline. And I write a chapter about this. It's entitled The Last Beat, and where my brother and I basically lay down next to her as she passed away. And that was a very difficult part to write.
So what's the one thing you want people to take away from this book?
I think that when they close the last page and put it down, they ask themselves, where would they be if their life circumstances had interrupted their path? In 2016, getting back to the whole family issue, during my last visit to Cuba, I took my wife and daughters to find my home in Matanzas, which is the city where I lived. I even wrote a chapter called Going Home in the book about this. On the flight back, my wife asked me, "Are you okay?" I said, "Yes." There was a pause, and she said, You know, hard as your life was in coming to the United States, can you imagine what your life might have been like if you had stayed there? You know, I ask myself that question every day. All I can say is I'm overcome by gratitude. I think most Latino and Cuban American families who've been in a situation like mine would really understand that. And I think they would take that message away and say, well, we're not all that different, are we?
Well, you know, immigration and immigrant bashing is at the forefront of all the news today. What kind of statement do you think your book can make to provide maybe a little different perspective?
Ooh, that could be a great rabbit hole. You know, not everyone arrives at the feet of Lady Liberty for the same reasons. Some are economic, others out of desperation and persecution. In the book, I make the case that when given a chance to be adopted by this country, I took it. It wasn't always easy or comfortable, but I made it a point to be a good American. I contributed to society, and like most of other immigrants do, I tried the best I could to hang on, and thanks to my family, I was able to do that. But you know, somebody has to drive a cab, clean houses, lay sheetrock, teach philosophy, do surgery, be a professor or a writer or a painter or a singer. We get kicked in the face. We stand up. We are maligned. We remember to forget, and then we remember to forgive. And that gives us hope. And it is that hope, Don, that allows us to give back and to be productive to this great country.
Now, your characters, are they pure fiction, or do you draw from people you know in real life?
Memoir is nonfiction, but I'm inclined to believe the idea that a good memoir is more than mastering of a capturing of the flavor of events recalled rather than obsessing over the minutiae of the facts. My childhood was fortunately dotted with very colorful characters, so it was fun to recollect what they looked like, how they spoke, down to the holes in their shoes, how their breath smelled. I mean, the palette was there. All I did was shape and structure the narrative. Fictional characters in my short stories are often a concoction of looks and mannerisms of friends, of people I've watched, former patients of mine and their families, and others are just plain inventive permutations of my mind.
So in your opinion, who should buy your book?
I think those looking for a fun read, 228 pages short, fits in a purse or coat pocket, great for a long bus ride, cross-country flight, rainy day at the beach. But Latinos, especially Cuban and Cuban Americans with families, would be very attracted to this book because I think it provides a historical and cultural backdrop and a familiar anchor to their roots. It'd be a great gift for grandparents or from grandparents to grown kids who were born in the United States and don't really know their roots. It might also appeal to older age folks of either gender in their 50s, 60s, 70s, who are curious about slice of life stories. I think in the book I wrestle with such universal themes that people can identify with: bullying, homophobia, misogyny, machismo, violence to animals, discrimination, isolation, stereotyping, and most importantly, what it means to be a good American.
Do you have a website?
Yes, I do. I even put it together myself. It's Gonzales-Rothi author.com. That's Gonzales with 2 Z's. In it, I share information about the Mango Chronicle, including the wonderful Kirkus review and recent 5-star ratings I've had from readers. But there's even a 2-minute book leader video that I produced on the second page, which I think is kind of interesting and amusing. I also list my other published works, my bio and upcoming events, as well as my YouTube channel. I welcome folks to take a look at it and learn a little about me. And I also encourage them to contact me with any questions you might have. And by the way, I'm fluent in Spanish and English, and I'm pretty good with conversational French. So fire away.
Well, this has been just great. Our guest today has been Ricardo Jose Gonzales-Rothi, and he is the author of the Mango Chronicle. Ricardo, thanks very much for being with us today.
It's been a pleasure, Don. Thank you so much for having me.
This is Don McCauley wrapping up another edition of The Author Show. Go out there, buy the book today, and please share this interview with your friends so that they too have the opportunity to discover our guests and their work. The Author Show can be accessed at any time at theauthorshow.com, and whether you're an author who would like to be featured or a reader in search of new books to read, The Author Show is a great place to start. Check us daily as we continue to introduce wonderful authors of very interesting books on The Author Show.
Thanks for listening to The Author Show. Find out more about authors and their work at theauthorshow.com. Theauthorshow.com. Tune in next time to another great author on The Author Show.